Well, thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of my legislation, H.R. 3071, the Federal Acquisition Savings Act of 2017. This legislation seeks to modernize our government's outdated acquisition strategies while simultaneously acting as good stewards of valuable taxpayer dollars. My bill would simply require federal agencies to consider renting as a cost-effective alternative in equipment acquisition, giving the government options that the private sector has undertaken and has seen success in cost savings with. As previously reported by the General Accounting Office, the GAO, the federal government spends more than $200 billion on average either purchasing or leasing equipment. Of those acquisition decisions, purchasing of equipment accounts for more than 99% of that share. Federal agencies are instructed to consider the cost-effectiveness of these strategies as they move through the process, but even that has been found to be lacking. The GAO has found that in many instances, federal agencies don't even bother to undertake these analyses. That means that the taxpayers are the ones who lose out as federal agencies sidestep these responsibilities and undertake what in many times is the easiest but most expensive route, purchasing. This is an issue the Commission and this body have been looking at for years. In 2012, the GAO issued a report finding that contracted officials from the Air Force and Interior did not perform the lease versus purchase analysis for many of the contracts awarded. Then, in July of 2020, GSA issues a RFI seeking to determine if there is a distinction between leasing and renting of equipment. The overwhelming response to the RFI indicated that amending the Federal Acquisition Regulation, the FAR, to include renting would be pertinent. However, the GSI did not act on that recommendation. These actions have resulted in this legislation in the good faith effort to ensure taxpayer dollars are spent wisely and that the federal requirements of the federal acquisition are followed. Under subpart 7.4 of the FAR, agencies are directed to conduct a case-by-case evaluation of the cost between leasing and purchasing. As I mentioned earlier, many of those analyses aren't conducted. Amending this part of the FAR will open up new avenues and will allow them to pursue successes and cost savings being used in the private sector. For instance, the Texas Department of Transportation is reporting savings of $10.8 million within the Fleet Operations Division. These savings are realized when the additional cost of ownership are factored, including maintenance, transportation, and other areas. In addition to this example, the Mississippi Department of Transportation commissioned a study finding that they could find significant cost savings per unit if they utilize renting equipment as an option. Rental agreements are often thought of as short-term transactions with no fixed duration. This gives the renter, in this case the federal agencies, more say in how the equipment is used and the duration of the need for that equipment. For instance, specialized equipment that is only needed several times a year or is needed in varying locations can be sourced via renting to reduce overhead cost. As this body continues to pursue meaningful legislation to reduce the burden of our constituents and streamline the government, this is a great step forward. My bipartisan legislation will reduce waste in the federal government while giving them the opportunity to pursue new and innovative ways to source equipment. Too often we see areas of mismanagement within the federal government that can and should be addressed, and this is a chance to help correct the ship one step at a time. This bipartisan legislation passed the Oversight and Government Reform Committee with overwhelming support, and I thank my colleagues on the committee and on this bill for their support and persistence in addressing shortfalls in the federal government. Please join me in support of this legislation and help us ensure future acquisition decisions are done with the taxpayers in mind. Thank you, Mr.